Sourdough bread is famous for being healthy.
As a doctor, I love sourdough bread.
As a holistic nutritionist, I absolutely love sourdough bread.
Let's see why sourdough bread is healthier than regular bread.
But how does it compare to this method for whole wheat bread? According to this paper, this method not only makes whole wheat bread softer and more flavorful, but potentially healthier for us. Just 4 words to describe it: 18-hour cold pre-ferment. In this video, we're reviewing the science, and we'll use this method to make an ultimate whole wheat bread recipe you can use for almost everything. I'm going to show you 5 different ways to use this dough, all made with 100% whole wheat flour. It's so soft, fluffy, and flavorful, and you don't even need an oven to make bread with it. Hey, Seraphin here, and fiber maxing has gone viral. Fiber is healthier for you, protects you from certain types of cancer, and could even help you lose weight. You don't have to take my word for this, because this study looked at evidence from 17,511,277 individuals. That is over half the population of Australia, 2 times the people in New York, and almost half that of Canada. One of their biggest conclusions was that fiber literally lowers mortality risk. It helps you stay alive. But over 90% of Americans don't get enough fiber. And in the UK, fiber intake has stayed at around 19 grams per day. I do not have any right to judge anyone, because my fiber intake a few months ago was literally 5 grams a day. Terrible. So I started making whole wheat bread. But then I found something that kind of surprised me. As it turns out, there are several different kinds of fiber, and they don't always work the same way. Specifically, not all fiber can be eaten by gut bacteria. If we take whole wheat, for example, it's a rich source of fiber, containing 9 to 17% dietary fiber. However, according to this paper, only about 34% of that fiber is fermentable by gut bacteria. That's barely over a third of the fiber. This is a shame, considering how important our gut health is. This scientific paper notes that the gut microbiome literally affects all aspects of human health. Now, enter resistant starch. Resistant starch is basically starch that we cannot digest within 120 minutes, so it gets to go to our good gut bacteria instead. It is highly fermentable and promoted the formation of good gut bacteria. Although there isn't exactly enough evidence to say that it directly improves health, it has become a very popular topic, and more research is ongoing. So it's probably a good idea to eat more of it. But even in whole grain foods, resistant starch shows up in relatively low quantities. That's why many studies focus on increasing it. According to this paper, the amount of resistant starch that will have beneficial health effects is variously defined by different authors as at least 14% of the total starch, 6 grams per meal, or 20 grams per day. This is much more than what's in most regular whole wheat breads. Looking at this paper, whole wheat breads made with a regular straight dough that's fermented for around 2 hours at a warm temperature come out with about 7.74% resistant starch. Not enough to meet the 14% we just mentioned earlier. But that all changes when you use either sourdough or this method. For those of you who have been following me for a while, this method is pretty awesome because it combines 2 of my favorite things: pre-ferments and cold fermentation. In case you haven't heard of them, pre-ferments are when you take a portion of the flour in a bread recipe and then mix it with water and yeast to ferment for a while before adding it to the main bread dough. And the key to this whole wheat method is to take half of the dough's total whole wheat flour and make a pre-ferment with that before stuffing it into the fridge for 18 hours. This paper called it a refrigerated sponge dough, RSD for short, and they found that this method of making whole wheat bread not only resulted in the softest and fluffiest texture, even when compared to sourdough, it also increased the resistant starch inside the bread drastically. Straight fermentation results in 7.74% resistant starch, while refrigerated sponge dough results in a much higher percentage at 13.8%. Sourdough had a similar range of resistant starch, being a bit higher at 14.75%, but this wasn't a statistically significant difference. All in all, the two whole wheat breads made with sourdough or the refrigerated sponge dough were both lower in glycemic index. This is pretty cool to see, and as a home baker, I had to try it out for myself. But wait, how does this all work? Well, for starters, the refrigerated sponge makes the bread fluffier and softer, mainly because it makes the gluten stronger. Quoting from the paper, RSD fermentation could promote protein polymerization, resulting in the formation of a stronger network structure and greater integrity of the gluten network. Protein polymerization essentially means the gluten gets together to form larger molecules. They link up, and this makes them stronger. This can be quantified by looking at the rheology of the bread dough. In another part of the paper, it's noted that the RSD samples, owing to their strong gluten network, showed the most complete network structure. Now, this is about more than just a fluffier bread. Apparently, the interaction between starch granules and gluten proteins might make them more difficult to digest, more resistant. Yes, an increase in the resistant starch. Microscopic images also clearly showed that the starch in both bread types was tightly wrapped by gluten proteins, creating a physical barrier that would be expected to increase the resistance of these starch molecules. Now, beyond resistant starch and fluffier bread, the RSD method also resulted in lower browning. Low temperature fermentation inhibits yeast activity, and the complex starch that wasn't broken down, along with the starch that's wrapped by protein, all led to less Maillard reaction and less browning. And so we do have less flavor in that sense. It's relatively easy to fix though. You could slap on some egg wash for a bit of glaze to improve the bread's color if you'd like to. All in all, I think of this method as a great option to improve whole wheat bread. Even disregarding the health benefits, the fact that it makes the bread softer and fluffier, even when compared to sourdough, is already a win. To increase the resistant starch content further and help preserve the bread, I also froze it after making it. It's super easy to heat up in the microwave or oven. Just give it a spritz of water so that it doesn't dry up too much. This whole wheat dough is not limited to making shokopao or the like. I've used it to make cinnamon rolls, pita bread, dinner rolls, and more. It is truly an awesome all-purpose recipe. And of course, it does use a lot more science than I just mentioned earlier. So even if you're using sourdough, you might find a lot of useful tips for making whole wheat bread. I used honey to make this bread, but that is an optional ingredient. I've skipped it before with little problem. For this recipe, we're also going to be using the Tangzhong method and raising the water content of the dough. According to this paper, using gelatinized starch in the dough along with adding more water leads to better whole wheat bread. Milk is added at a level recommended by this paper, which I discussed in more depth in my previous video on burger buns. And now, a very, very, very important note. One of the biggest things that leads to dense whole wheat bread is the use of the wrong whole wheat flour. This is very much dependent on the protein content of the flour. This whole wheat flour has a really high protein content with a minimum of roughly 13.5%. To get the best bread that you can, you want to make sure you use a whole wheat flour with a similarly high protein content. Otherwise, you'll find that the dough just can't get stronger and you'll end up with extremely dense loaves. This is probably what results in so many people struggling with whole wheat bread. Okay, with those things out of the way, let's get into the recipe. Now, I'm obviously not a food scientist and this isn't a lab, so this recipe won't be following the method described in the paper to a T. And although 18 hours is the fermentation time used by the paper, I will note that I have fermented the pre-ferment and dough for longer with pretty good results. Okay, first things first, let's make the Poolish. In a bowl, we've got whole wheat flour. We're going to add our yeast to the bowl and quickly stir that in, making sure it's relatively well mixed into the flour. I'm using chopsticks because they are the best for this. Okay, then we're going to add our water and mix everything in. This should go by super quick, takes less than a minute. Now we clean off our chopsticks and cover the bowl. We want to put this in the fridge to rise for 18 hours. Next, we move on to the Tangzhong. I'm first going to prepare a bowl by heating it up with some hot water. I just pour the water in and let it sit for a bit. after which we want to pour out the hot water. And then with an already measured bowl of flour by the side, we're going to make the Tangzhong by pouring in boiling hot water. The bowl is on top of a scale, so we know exactly how much is going in. And immediately after, we want to toss in the flour, stirring everything together. I use a spoon here. I find it makes it a lot easier, although I do clean the spoon off with a spatula when I'm done mixing all the flour in. And we cover the bowl before putting it in the fridge next to the Poolish, leaving them both overnight. All right, 18 hours later, we can make the bread dough. These are our ingredients already measured out and ready to go. The butter has also been left to soften for a bit. I will be showing you how to mix this dough by hand, but you could also use a stand mixer for this if you wanted to. To mix the dough, we start with the Poolish, using a spatula to get it out and into the mixing bowl with flour in it, following it with the honey, salt, and milk. At this point, we're going to take a few minutes to combine everything before adding the Tangzhong and butter, just to develop some gluten first. I also like to knead the dough well by hand. This should take around 4 to 5 minutes until it becomes homogeneous like this. And at this point, we add the Tangzhong using the scraper and then the butter. Now, the trick to getting everything mixed together quickly is to basically try to stuff the dough with butter and Tangzhong, kind of folding the edges of the dough into the center, putting them in, and then you can just knead the dough a bit. After about 4 to 5 minutes of this, you should have a dough that's somewhat come together. At this stage, you can continue to develop gluten easily using slap and folds. Basically, you lift the dough up and toss it down like this, allowing it to stretch and fold over a little bit before turning your hand and continuing. Once the dough looks much smoother and passes the window pane test, we can cover the bowl and leave it to bulk ferment for around 1.5 hours at room temperature so that it doubles in size. You might need to ferment for longer if you live in a cooler climate, although you could also put the dough into the fridge if you'd like to. After the dough has risen, we can divide it. Now from here, the recipe changes depending on what you want to make. For the first option, I'm going to show you how to make dinner rolls. Arguably the easiest option, we just divide the dough into 8. I'm using a scale to get perfectly even results. And then I pre-shape the dough by rounding them into balls. Just push the edges into the center and then roll with your palm. Repeat for all pieces. We let the dough rest for 15 minutes now. And while the dough is resting, we can line the baking pan we're using with non-stick coating before coming back and shaping the dough. It's really the same thing as before, but we do want to make sure they are fully degassed here and much tauter and neater when we roll them into balls, tiny little balls. Then we put the shaped dough into the baking pan, repeating for all the pieces. After that, we cover the pan and let that rise for 1 hour, taking the time to preheat the oven to 175 degrees Celsius. They should become puffy like this. Then we bake the rolls at 175 degrees Celsius, bottom rack for around 20 to 25 minutes. If the top becomes dark, you can use parchment paper to cover it. And that's how you make these delicious, fluffy dinner rolls, healthy and filling without sacrificing taste. All right, moving on. Who doesn't love a good chocopan? Going back to our dough dividing stage, to make chocopan, we're going to divide the dough into 2. Again, I'm using a scale to evenly divide it, and then quickly pre-shaping the 2 pieces into round balls like so. We cover the dough and leave it to rest for 15 minutes. While it rests, I'm going to line the Pullman loaf pan we're using with some non-stick coating. And when we're done with that and the dough has relaxed, it's time for shaping. First off, we roll the dough out into a wide oval and fold in the sides to make a long rectangle. Next, we want to extend the length of this rectangle using our rolling pin to really stretch it out and properly degas it. And when it's long enough, we're going to roll it up like this, starting from the top and moving back. We want to roll the dough up nice and tight, sealing the bottom if needed. We repeat this for the other piece of dough, following the exact same steps. Then arranging the dough spirals in opposing directions, we put them into the loaf pan. Pressing on them both once they're in to settle them and adjust them a little more. From here, we let the dough rise for another 1 hour or until they are just under the loaf pan's lid. While they rise, we preheat the oven to 190 degrees Celsius. And when the time's up, we bake the loaf at 190 degrees Celsius for 30 to 35 minutes. And we're done. That's how you make these fragrant, fluffy loaves of whole wheat bread that make for the perfect breakfast toast. Next up, we're making coffee buns and pita bread. This is a double batch, so I'm dividing all the dough into 12 pieces and then rounding them all into little balls. The coffee buns have butter inside, so to prevent the butter from leaking, I'm sacrificing one bun to make 6 smaller ones that I'm going to stuff with butter like so. Just putting the block of butter inside and then folding them in. Then we put this butter-filled dough inside the larger bread dough after flattening it, with the seam side up, of course. We shape the dough into a round bowl like usual, repeating for all pieces of dough. We let the dough proof for 1 hour on top of a baking pan lined with parchment paper. While it rests, we preheat the oven to 175 degrees Celsius and prepare the cookie batter for topping the bread. Very simple recipe. I'm making 2 flavors here, matcha and coffee. This part literally just calls for mixing things together. And when the dough is done, our oven is hot, we can pipe the toppings onto the top of the buns. It has been a ridiculously long time since I've done this, so do forgive these horribly clumsy lines. When all the dough is topped, we bake the buns at 175 degrees Celsius for 25 to 30 minutes. And that's how you make these delicious coffee and matcha buns with butter inside. And for our penultimate recipe, pita bread. To make pita bread, we just want to take one of our pre-shaped dough balls and then flatten it out with a rolling pin. That's literally the only goal for shaping pita. We want to aim for a flat, round circle, using flour as needed to prevent sticking. Repeating this for all dough pieces. We let the dough rest for 30 minutes then, and afterwards it's off to the stove. We heat the pan to around 200 degrees Celsius and then start making pita bread. When I put the dough in, I always like to press it down into the pan, allowing it to completely flatten. I'll wait for it to rise just a little bit before flipping it and pressing it down. And this is where it should start puffing up, eventually reaching a fully inflated state. After it's fully puffed up like that, we want to flip it again and cook for another 1 to 2 minutes on the other side, and it should be done. Pita bread is hands down one of my favorite ways to use this dough, and it's always so fun to watch the bread rise. For our final option, we are making cinnamon rolls. To make cinnamon rolls, we are taking the dough and completely rolling it out into a wide rectangle that is about 1/2 centimeter thick. I'm using this filling recipe to completely slather the dough and also adding raisins to half of it. After which, we're going to roll up the dough and cut it into 8 individual rolls, placing them into a pre-lined baking pan. Then we proof the dough for 1 hour, taking the time to preheat the oven to 175 degrees Celsius. We bake the dough for 20 to 25 minutes, and then we have delightful cinnamon rolls. And that's it for this video. Thanks for watching, and bye!